Hello everyone and welcome to this video. Today I'll be showing you guys how to paint some beautiful Lannister guard from the A Song of Ice and Fire miniatures game. First of all, I'm just adding a quick and I'd say pretty dirty priming job. So I just added a plain matte black. Now I'm going to do like kind of a standard gray and a standard white. Just going to be putting that at higher and higher angles, and I wouldn't necessarily worry about the coverage. You can see there's some reddish on them, but for me the primer's more of like helping with the brightness of the paints, having a nice undercoat, and also just being kind of the glue that sticks the paint to the model. I've had pretty bad experiences of priming things with too much primer or just doing a really poor job, so I was kind of careful when I did the whole set to make sure I have a really smooth coat. So especially when I was doing metallics, you can see how smooth it is and if you compare that to things I did before, which I'm not really inclined to show you, it's like sandpaper versus just like a beautiful glass sheet. It's really insane, the quality. So definitely check out my priming and painting video. Now I'll be washing the metals, and I'll be using a talent in a bottle, not to just give it a simple coat over and maybe like a silvery highlight. But what I'm going to do is actually leave the base coat as a highlight and really push that wash really hard. And this contrast will look really awesome. So the idea here is that you're just kind of blending that, well, not really blending, you're just using that wash and kind of smoothing it over and kind of building it up in a certain area of the figure. So like on the shoulder plate, you'd be focusing on pushing it off the ridge itself. So you'd be starting on the top of the ridge, just moving down into the recesses on each edge of it. Same thing with the sword, you'd be starting at the point and building down towards it and try and get a nice layer. So what you could do as well, if it's not strong enough or if it's not smooth enough, you could just add more after it dries, and you can see it has a really nice effect. So what it's doing is really like adding kind of a spotlight of brightness, but you don't have to worry about like blending in another lighter layer. You're just kind of leaving that base layer with its kind of natural smoothness. And just because it's washes are inks, they have a much smoother texture than paint. So that means you can really use that ability of it being so absorbent to kind of add a really nice smooth effect. Like I just use my fingers to just kind of suck up the paint, or use the side of the brush like I was doing as well, just kind of dabbing up those areas of paint you want brighter. And so you can see it has a pretty nice effect. Like definitely for this, you can see there's kind of a line where the darker and light area meet. So what I'll do is I'll focus on getting that area darker and then keeping that lighter area lighter, of course. But that's just a way to kind of do a little different metal that's not super complicated, but it does add a decent amount of work. But I feel like it really can create kind of an extra layer of depth to your model. Instead of just having that simple coat over, it kind of like adds even more pop, because you can see that transition of that very shiny, bright, undimmed area to that very dark, almost completely muted area. And now for the well, I guess you can call it a highlight. I'm using P3 brass, and with this color what I'm doing is just hitting all those areas that I think would be a good spot for it. So the designs on the blade, the edges on the armor plates, I think those are excellent spots for this nice brass color to take over, and it adds a really nice kind of richness, which you don't really get with the kind of the gray tones. But of course we're adding quite a bit of vibrancy with this basic coat of red, and I'll just be adding a second thin layer onto that just to make sure it's nice and strong. And what this will do is give us a very, very nice base to work with when we're blending. That's right, I'll be blending my base coat, which is, I wouldn't say quite adventurous, but it's definitely a step up from just base, wash, highlight. It adds a little bit of work, but in some ways it just looks so much better, and it makes a lot more sense. Like, you can't really wash a cloak. You know, you can't just put like, you know, dark red wash on and say like, oh, look how great that is, you know? So you could definitely do that. Like here, I'm basically putting on a thin layer of this darker red color to kind of imply shadow since the shield is tilted down. But for the cloak itself, you could definitely do like a red ink or a red wash, and then kind of glaze like I did with the sword. But with this one, I wanted to go a little crazy, and it actually turns out pretty dang well. So closer up, maybe it won't look as nice because of how bright the pinkish color is, but with the kind of blending we'll be doing, it will tone it down a little bit. So basically, it's add that pinkish tone where you want the highlight. So top of the back, on the kind of the stomach area above the belt, and kind of to the left and right of the belt when the greasecoat opens, that's where it shows the highlights. Also the back of the leg, that's where it's kind of raised up, so it would be a bit brighter, and so I chose those areas for the pink. Of course, also kind of those intersections on that puffed kind of sleeve there. So you can see I'm starting off with this pink coat, and what I'm doing there is just simply just, you know, adding that color, and then blending that in with the base tone. And so both are kind of thin, so you may want to go back and just strengthen that up a little bit and maybe smooth out the blend. But basically what you can see, what all I'm doing is just adding a bit of that pure color, washing my brush off, then adding some different pure color, and then kind of mixing them together. And then without washing my brush off, I'm kind of adding more and more. So like if I'm working between like the pink here and the base tone, I'll be kind of working them together, and I'll be working the darker color together. But of course, you don't want to pollute your pure colors too much. So it's best to do most of the blending on the actual mini itself. Although you could make a nice gradient on your wet palette if you have one, and all that will do is just say you kind of have like an intermediate tone, that you're trying to you know, blend in, but it's not working. So that's where you can come in and just, you know, work your way through. But you can see blending here, I had quite a bit more pink than the actual area I wanted to add, and also with the darker tone as well, you kind of want to add more than you're actually going to have, because you can see as I blend up the pink, since it's not as strong of a color, it kind of blends into the red and works together to form kind of a nice gradient. And the same thing with the darker tone, is I'm adding that in, just not too much, just because of how strong dark colors usually are, and that blends very nicely. So you can see here it's like a ugly stripe at first, but as I work with the mid-tone, it blends together and makes a really nice color. Now for here, I chose to do the kind of the insignia, the sigils, whatever you want to call it, with like a variety of yellow tones. So this is called Dark Flesh by Vallejo, which is actually a pretty strong yellow. I was surprised to find, but that turned out to be a nice base coat because of its consistency and the kind of color it had. But for the brightening it up, it would be weird if I just highlighted the edges, so I kind of just picked out the main area with kind of like a thinner, you know, brighter yellow and a golden yellow, And what that allowed me to do was kind of place the paint in a way that it'd be pretty highlighted, but it wouldn't look unnatural, if you know what I mean. Like if you had a t-shirt, you know, you'd have a brighter area of color if you had some kind of insignia on it, but it wouldn't be like a sharp line unless it was actually designed into it, which of course it's not here, so pardon me, that's just something to keep in mind. But for the kind of the lower shirt or cloak, and for the leg and the legs and kind of inside there, that flat area, I decided to go with like that darker red and just a pure form of that, which I've been using to darken the clothes with, and then an even darker tone to give that final color. And if you take it out from under the super bright light, you know, which you should be painting under, just to give you like the best clarity in terms of what your colors are, and you know, what's actually on the model. If it's too dark, you can miss spots. It really turns into a nice set of tones when it's kind of more in a natural lighting. But here you can see I'm just, you know, putting this leather brown on all the brown areas, so a little generic, but I felt that it worked well with the scheme of the Lannister Guard, which is, you know, they're kind of, you know, regularly supplied troops, so they probably have like a large set of cattle they get their leather from, you know, so they're probably not going to vary too much. But I mean, of course they can, but that's a little off topic. So you can either mix flesh wash and strong tone, or like 8 to 12 drops of brown ink, and then half a drop or less of dark ink, then some matte medium and some water. So basically these are ways of getting kind of a nice medium darkish brown, more of a medium brown I'd say, and I find this to be a pretty effective leather wash. The reason why I decided to mix my own was I kind of realized how much I'd be using for so many models, and it's also kind of nice just to have these inks, just because I like for the swords, if I wanted to use maybe a stronger ink than just like a black wash, I could potentially do that. And so that's definitely something you can experiment with. But I feel like the army painter washes especially are a really great choice for painting, and that's what I usually use. So that's definitely something to keep in mind. Is you don't have to use you know, some kind of concoction of your own you know, of inks and whatever, if you're much more comfortable using washes. So for here, after I apply all the wash, it's just kind of in a general format just to kind of tone down the brown a little bit and add some detail. I'm going back with the base tone, and you can lighten the base tone a little bit or even more, and just highlighting all these areas like the scabbard, the some parts of the boots, the leather pouch on the side, and the gloves. And so it kind of adds a little more variety to them and adds that kind of natural brightness, which of course you want. And so you can see it's just a matter of just taking kind of a thin layer, or like kind of a thin paint, and just, you know, hitting it with the side of the brush and just adding a little more brightness to it in whatever spots make sense. Now here we get to the skin tones, and so I do a kind of a poor job showing you, just because the sword and hand get in the way of the face quite a bit. But essentially it's I'm using Bugman's Glow, which is a nice fleshy tone. It's a GW paint, but I find it super effective, which is why I bought it, was because it has a very nice base tone for the skin colors to kind of follow. I don't know how to say it, like you know, you paint over them. You paint over it basically. It's a nice undercoat. Let's say that. So then I added a barbarian flesh tone, which is kind of a little bit fleshy but kind of more pale. Then I added a flesh wash to get those details, and I'm going to start highlighting it. So barbarian flesh tone, then I use like pale skin. Both of these are army painter colors, or paints, but what I'm doing is just hitting the less and less of the the main cheek area, like above, like the eye level and above, and the neck, and I'm just doing the chin, the cheekbones where they would be, and the nose. And so some of these models don't have very pronounced noses, which is a shame. Like some of the facial details kind of suck, which means that it's hard to paint the eyes and the nose especially well, and see those details pop out. But they're not supposed to be super sharp in real life, but still, it's like it is kind of a shame that's an issue. So it's best to just, you could sculpt the nose on, or just have like scars and broken noses, that sort of thing, like maybe trying to incorporate that into the scheme. But I'd say it's best to just work with what you have, and just bring out the best of the cheekbones, maybe the chin a little less. But what I did was, even though it looks pretty crappy right now, is that tone, how the eyes and all that, the forehead are dark and really washed over, and I haven't touched them at all. When you see them in natural light with the shadow falling on them, it looks really, really great. I feel it looks pretty realistic, and it also gets you out of a job of painting very difficult eyes, since how obscured they are. And if you try to paint them, I feel they would just look so unnatural. You'd have to use very, very fine work. And for these kind of models, it's much easier to just do like quick blend, quick kind of hit of all the facial features, and try and get that going through, especially if you don't have a lot of experience, and so you're kind of taking your time, then it is going to be really frustrating to deal with that. So just something to keep in mind. But now, of course, we are going on to the hair. So the magic of the hair is basically just, paint on a base coat and maybe lighten up the tone a little bit, and just, apply it in those highlight areas, like kind of thin, just, with a moderate amount of control. And that's essentially it. There's so little on it that you don't need to apply a bunch of washes or really worry about the technique too much, just because it's more of like it's more of just kind of a little bit poking out. So don't have to be too concerned about having some kind of beautiful silky hair. I would say they're probably matted and dull, so they're not going to be something like noteworthy on them, which is why I think it's better to leave them a little more plain. So now we are getting onto the banners, which is actually, I feel, quite an important part of the unit. They're quite noticeable. So I decided it would be best to do the red color first. I mean, you can see how much I'm getting on the what's supposed to be the yellow, / golden areas. So yeah, it's best I do that first. Add like 2 or 3 layers of it to get a very nice strong red, and then I'll be adding a few layers of the basic dark flesh tone underneath, and then after that I'll be doing the kind of lighter golden tones on like the top of the flag and that sort of thing. And that's basically it. I wanted to match it with the tones of the cloak and the sigil, so it would kind of, they'll probably be using the same Lannister red, and so I thought that would probably be the most appropriate. They, red and yellow banners, which they do feel a bit, I don't know, I'm not 100% happy with them, but I feel like it does work well matching with the coats themselves. So I feel like adding different reds in or different colors wouldn't really work too well. So that's why I kind of just kept it focused on that. And in the end, I'm reasonably happy with it. And I think that's what you should be aiming for with your models. They don't have to be perfect, but I feel I'm much happier with them than being unpainted. Let's just say that. They look pretty good unpainted, but I don't feel it's a disaster, something I need to fix. It just feels like, it's on the mark. It got there. Let's just let's just end with that. But another thing to note is that with the like the code itself, I wanted to add a nice amount of detail on the banner. So what that means is having that darker tone and a little bit of that lighter tone, just introducing it gently into the kind of the tops, like the crests and the folds of the kind of waving banner. So that'll give it a little bit of depth. Like you can see here, it's a little flat, but adding that nice golden color to the top, and later on I'll be adding those nice red tones to kind of break up that plain red, and give a little bit more depth to it. It's gonna really kind of finish off pretty nicely. So yeah, it's just a simple matter of just putting a little bit on and then blending it out, with the base tone and with the highlight tone, just trying to hitting it at the right place. So at those crests right there, and wherever it's kind of deep, and just not worrying too much about how bright it is or how dark it is. I feel it should just add a little bit to the tones, and that's kind of the main effect there. Because of how exposed it is to light, I feel like you don't have to worry about maximizing the contrast, but if you do that, I think it could look pretty cool. But it's just kind of your taste in that regard. Now for the brown, well, what am I saying? For brown, I'll be just putting that kind of on the inside of the shield, kind of like just like a simple coat basically, and same thing with the staff of the flag and the little top there as well. I'll be just putting brown on that, and you could definitely add like a little bit brighter brown, and kind of highlight those areas a teeny bit, but that's kind of just a little detail, and after that you're kind of done. Well, I hope you guys enjoyed, and I'll see you for the next one.